Hey Team Bio, I hope you enjoyed The Private Lives of Plants, narrated by David Attenborough. Some super cool plants and their pollinators, and great examples of co-evolution in that film. We are studying plant sexual reproduction because the next big unit that we're jumping into is meiosis. Before meiosis, we studied mitosis, which led to the creation of two identical cells, genetic clones, and meiosis is cell division that leads to gametes. Gametes being either egg or sperm. So there are a couple different things that have to happen in the process of meiosis. Cells need to half their genetic material. They also need to mix it up. And so that's where we're going next. But before we go there, we're going to talk about the sexual reproductive structures of angiosperms, that's flowering plants, and talk a little bit about how plants reproduce sexually. And then we're going to dive into our study of what's happening on the cellular level, or meiosis, the creation of eggs or sperm. Okay, so important structures of angiosperms: flowers and fruits. Number one, down here, we have a structure called a sepal, or sepals. Sepals are, depending on the plant, they can look kind of like a petal or kind of like a leaf. They enclose the flower before it opens, and then they open up to expose the flower. So sepals are our structure down here. Our second structure is something you all probably know: petals. Petals are often vibrant colors, sometimes in the ultraviolet spectrum we can't even see, and they're attracting pollinators. Okay, now we're getting to the male parts of the flower. 3 is this structure called the anther. The anther, the cells of the anther create pollen, which is number 8. And pollen is like the sperm of the plant. It will be distributed by pollinators, whether it is an insect or a bird or a mammal or the wind, and it's going to find the female part of another flower, or the same flower if the flower is self-fertilizing. The anther sits on this long stalk that's called the filament. So the anther plus the filament and the pollen are all part of the male reproductive organ called the stamen. And I'm going to put them in pink. Okay, so here we have the male reproductive organ of the flower, the anthers, which produce the pollen and sit on the filament, and they all make up the stamen. Okay, then we have the female reproductive organ. Number 5 is called the style. And the style is a hollow tube down which pollen, which lands on the sticky part of the female reproductive organ, which is called the stigma. So pollen that lands on the stigma is going to grow a pollen tube down the length of the style into the ovary and fertilize a single ovule. OVUAL. Depending on the type of plant you have, there can either be a single ovule, which will mean that there's only one seed in the developing fruit, or it can be multiple ovules, which would mean there are many seeds developing in the fruit. So an example of multiple ovules would be like apples. Apples typically, I think, have 5 seeds, or tomatoes, which have tons of seeds. An example of a single ovule would be an acorn, which only has 1 single seed that's produced in the fruit. Okay, so the stigma plus the style, ovary, and ovule are all part of the female reproductive part of the flower called the carpel. So style, ovary, and ovule. All part of the female reproductive organ of the flower called the carpel. Okay. And, where did the pink go here? So here's some pollen grains up here. And here is the female part of the flower. Here. Okay. So as the flower, the whole point of a flower is to attract a pollinator so you can fertilize your ovules and create a seed, which is going to be a unique combination of genes. So this is plant sexual reproduction. Okay, what I'm going to draw here is all of this is blue. Here. And in the center, we have purple, a combination of blue and pink. Okay, so you'll notice here, as the flower, after the flower is fertilized, it starts to transition to becoming a fruit. The ovary swells up to become the fruit itself. So yes, if you are eating an apple, you are eating plant ovaries. Delicious. And inside of the fruit is our fertilized embryo, which is our seed. The seed is composed of a seed coat. Oops. Which will help enclose and protect the seed, and under the right conditions, usually the presence of water, sometimes sunlight is required for germination, sometimes even heat is required for germination. So like a wildfire sweeping through the forest will initiate germination of some seeds. The seed coat will burst open, and the developing embryo inside will start to grow. The little kind of plant-like looking structure in the center here is our embryo. It's the tiny baby plant. And inside of this tiny baby plant, there are already 2 leaves. They're not true leaves, they're called cotyledons that are all wrapped up inside of this structure. And when the seed is germinated, those cotyledons will unfurl and start to do photosynthesis. Additionally, there's a structure called the endosperm that is often rich in fat and protein, and it is surrounding the seed, and the germinating plant will feed off of this energy of the endosperm before it starts to perform photosynthesis. So often fruits or nuts and seeds are rich high in fat and protein, and that part that you're eating there is the endosperm. It's the food for the baby embryo. Okay, so you can see here the progression of a flower that will become a tomato. First, the bud develops, and then we see the sepals around the immature flower that are going to open up and just expose the flower. After the flower is fertilized, The ovary will start to swell as the seeds develop in here, and then we have a mature fruit. So that is all. In class on Wednesday and Thursday, you are going to be applying some of this reasoning to labeling a cross-section of a daffodil in class.